We've been sold a lie, and we've bought it so completely that we've organized our entire lives around it. The lie is this: the purpose of life is to be happy. And if you're not happy, something is fundamentally wrong with you or your circumstances. Happiness has become the ultimate goal, the measure of success, the thing we're all supposed to be pursuing above everything else. We're told to follow our bliss, do what makes us happy, prioritize our happiness, choose happiness. The self-help industry, worth billions of dollars, exists primarily to sell us strategies and techniques for becoming happier. Social media is filled with people curating images of their supposedly happy lives, making the rest of us feel inadequate for not being as joyful as everyone else appears to be. But Viktor Frankl, who survived Nazi concentration camps and spent decades helping people find meaning in their lives, would say we've got it completely backward. Happiness isn't something you can pursue directly. The more desperately you chase it, the more it eludes you. This isn't just philosophical speculation. It's observable reality. Think about the people you know who are most obsessed with being happy, who constantly ask themselves, "Am I happy?" and adjust their lives based on that question. Are they actually happier than people who are absorbed in meaningful pursuits regardless of whether those pursuits make them feel good moment to moment? Usually not. Often they're the most anxious, most unsatisfied, most restless people you know, perpetually searching for the next thing that might finally deliver the happiness they're convinced they deserve. Frankl called this the pursuit of happiness trap, and he saw it as a fundamental misunderstanding of human nature. He argued that humans are not primarily motivated by the will to pleasure, as Freud suggested, or by the will to power, as Adler proposed. Humans are motivated by the will to meaning. We need purpose more than we need happiness. We need something worth struggling for more than we need comfort. And here's the paradox that Frankl observed repeatedly in his clinical work and his own life. When you stop making happiness your goal and instead dedicate yourself to something meaningful, happiness often arrives as a side effect. But it only comes when you're not chasing it, when you're absorbed in something that matters to you independent of whether it makes you feel good. This insight directly contradicts the dominant cultural narrative of our time. We're told to do what feels good, to avoid discomfort, to optimize for pleasure and minimize pain. We're encouraged to quit jobs that don't make us happy, leave relationships that aren't fulfilling, rearrange our lives to maximize positive emotions. And certainly, there are times when leaving situations that are genuinely harmful is necessary and healthy. But the underlying assumption that life should feel good most of the time, that happiness is the natural state we should be experiencing if everything is going right, sets us up for perpetual disappointment and a shallow engagement with existence. Frankl saw this pattern play out in what he called the existential vacuum, a sense of inner emptiness that afflicts many people in modern affluent societies. These are people whose basic needs are met, who have freedom and options, who should be happy by any external measure, yet who feel profoundly hollow, as if life lacks meaning or purpose. They try to fill this void with pleasure-seeking, with entertainment, with consumption, with achievement, but nothing satisfies for long. The emptiness persists because what they're lacking isn't happiness. It's meaning. And meaning can't be found through pursuing pleasure. It emerges from engaging with something that matters, something that demands from you, something that's worth struggling for. Consider what actually gives people's lives depth and significance. Is it the times when everything was easy and pleasant? Usually not. When people look back on their lives, when they identify the experiences and periods that shaped them, that they're most proud of, that made them who they are, it's almost always times of challenge and struggle in service of something important. Raising children is exhausting, frustrating, often not particularly pleasant moment to moment. Yet most parents describe it as among the most meaningful experiences of their lives. Building a business, creating art, pursuing education, caring for aging parents, working for a cause you believe in, developing mastery in any domain, all of these involve significant struggle, discomfort, sacrifice. None of them are primarily about feeling good. Yet they're the things that make life feel worth living. This is what Frankl meant when he said we need purpose and struggle more than we need happiness. The struggle isn't an unfortunate obstacle on the path to happiness. The struggle, when it's in service of something meaningful, is itself part of what makes life fulfilling. We're not built for ease and comfort. We're built to strive, to overcome challenges, to dedicate ourselves to something beyond our own pleasure. When we have that, we can endure remarkable hardship. When we don't have it, even perfect circumstances feel empty. Frankl observed this starkly in the concentration camps. The prisoners who survived longest weren't those trying to maximize their own comfort or pleasure. That was impossible anyway. They were those who had something to live for beyond themselves, a task to complete, a person to reunite with, a testimony to bear. The struggle to survive became bearable, even meaningful, when connected to a purpose that transcended mere personal survival. Meanwhile, in his clinical work after the war, Frankl saw affluent patients with every material comfort suffering from depression, anxiety, and a sense of futility because their lives, while pleasant, lacked sufficient meaning or challenge. This has profound implications for how we approach our lives. It suggests that instead of asking, "What will make me happy?" we should be asking, "What is worth doing even if it's difficult? What purpose could I dedicate myself to that would make the inevitable struggles of life feel worthwhile? What can I give myself to that's larger than my own pleasure or comfort?" These questions point us toward meaning rather than happiness, toward purpose rather than pleasure. And paradoxically, they're more likely to result in genuine satisfaction than the direct pursuit of happiness ever could. The happiness obsession also makes us fragile. If your primary goal is to feel good, then any discomfort, any difficulty, any situation that doesn't feel pleasant becomes a crisis, evidence that something is wrong that needs to be fixed immediately. You become hypersensitive to your emotional state, constantly monitoring whether you're happy enough, comparing your internal experience to what you think it should be. This creates anxiety and dissatisfaction, even in perfectly adequate circumstances. In contrast, when your primary orientation is toward meaning and purpose, discomfort and difficulty are expected, even welcomed as part of the journey. You're not fragile because your well-being doesn't depend on feeling good. It depends on being engaged in something worthwhile, and you can be engaged in something worthwhile while experiencing all kinds of uncomfortable emotions. The shift from pursuing happiness to pursuing meaning is liberating. It frees you from the constant self-monitoring and self-judgment about whether you're happy enough. It allows you to choose difficulty when difficulty serves a purpose you value. It makes you resilient because your sense of a life well lived doesn't depend on circumstances being pleasant. And ironically, it often results in more genuine happiness than the direct pursuit of happiness ever could, because you're experiencing the deep satisfaction that comes from living in alignment with what matters most to you, regardless of whether it feels good moment to moment. If this perspective resonates with you and you want to explore more deeply how meaning, not happiness, is the key to a fulfilling life, subscribe to the channel. We're diving into ideas that can fundamentally transform how you approach your existence. Viktor Frankl proposed something radical that contradicted the dominant psychological theories of his time and still challenges much of contemporary thinking about human motivation. He argued that the fundamental drive in human beings is not the pursuit of pleasure, as Freud believed, and not the pursuit of power, as Adler suggested, but the pursuit of meaning. He called this the will to meaning, and he considered it the primary motivational force in human life. This wasn't abstract theorizing. It was a conclusion drawn from the most extreme laboratory of human experience imaginable, the Nazi concentration camps, and refined through decades of clinical practice, helping thousands of people navigate depression, anxiety, and existential despair. In the camps, Frankl observed that survival often had little to do with physical strength or favorable circumstances. He saw robust young men give up and die, while frail elderly prisoners somehow found the will to continue. The difference, he concluded, was meaning. Those who had a compelling reason to survive, a purpose that transcended the immediate horror of their circumstances, accessed reserves of strength that seemed to defy physical explanation. A man who believed his wife was still alive, and he would see her again, found reason to endure another day. A scientist who had unfinished research that only he could complete found motivation to persist. A person who felt they had a testimony to bear about what happened in the camps, a story that must be told, discovered strength they didn't know they possessed. The common thread was meaning, a sense that their existence mattered for reasons beyond their own survival or comfort. This observation directly contradicts the pleasure principle that underlies so much of modern psychology and culture. We assume that people are fundamentally motivated to seek pleasure and avoid pain, and that all human behavior can be understood as attempts to maximize positive feelings and minimize negative ones. Marketing, politics, education, even our personal decision-making often operates on this assumption. We're constantly being sold strategies for feeling better, techniques for increasing happiness, paths to more pleasure and less discomfort. But Frankl's experience suggested something different. He found that people could endure tremendous suffering, could sacrifice pleasure and comfort, could even choose death over survival when meaning was at stake. The will to meaning was more fundamental than the will to pleasure. This has profound implications for how we understand ourselves and structure our lives. If Frankl is right, then many of our problems aren't actually problems of insufficient happiness or pleasure. They're problems of insufficient meaning. The person who has everything they thought they wanted but feels empty isn't suffering from a happiness deficiency. They're suffering from a meaning deficiency. The anxiety and restlessness that characterize so much of modern life aren't primarily emotional problems requiring emotional solutions. They're existential problems requiring existential solutions. We're trying to fill a meaning-shaped hole with pleasure-shaped objects, and it doesn't work. It can't work. Consider the phenomenon of the midlife crisis. Someone reaches middle age, having achieved many of the goals they set for themselves when younger. They have the career, the family, the house, the symbols of success. By all objective measures, they should be satisfied. Instead, they feel a growing sense of emptiness, a question that becomes increasingly insistent. Is this all there is? The conventional interpretation is that they need to recapture lost youth, find new sources of pleasure, make changes that will make them happier. So they buy the sports car, have the affair, make dramatic life changes in pursuit of feeling better. But Frankl would diagnose the problem differently. The crisis isn't about insufficient happiness. It's about insufficient meaning. The goals they achieved were borrowed from culture, from family expectations, from a younger self who hadn't yet grappled with deeper questions of purpose and significance. Now those goals are accomplished and revealed to be hollow, not because achievement doesn't matter, but because achievement without connection to genuine meaning doesn't satisfy. The solution isn't to pursue different pleasures or find new sources of happiness. It's to connect with or discover deeper purpose, to ask what truly matters to you independent of external validation or social expectations, to identify what you could dedicate yourself to that would make your existence feel significant. This might involve continuing in the same job or relationship, but approaching it with a renewed sense of purpose. It might involve changing direction entirely. But the key variable isn't whether the new path is more pleasant or makes you happier. It's whether it's more meaningful, whether it calls something forth from you, whether it connects you to something larger than your own satisfaction. Frankl also observed that the will to meaning expresses itself differently than the will to pleasure. The pursuit of pleasure is inherently self-focused. You're constantly monitoring your own emotional state, asking whether you feel good, whether you're satisfied, whether your needs are being met. This creates a kind of hyper-self-consciousness that paradoxically interferes with the very satisfaction you're seeking. Happiness, as we discussed, can't be pursued directly. It emerges as a side effect of engagement with something beyond yourself. The will to meaning, in contrast, is inherently self-transcendent. It directs your attention outward, toward the task to be accomplished, the person to be loved, the cause to be served, the problem to be solved. You're absorbed in something beyond yourself, and in that absorption, you forget to monitor whether you're happy. Your well-being becomes a byproduct rather than the goal. This is what Frankl meant when he said that self-actualization is possible only as a side effect of self-transcendence. The contemporary focus on self-actualization, on becoming your best self, on personal growth and development, often paradoxically keeps people stuck in self-absorption. They're constantly examining themselves, trying to optimize themselves, comparing their progress to others, worried about whether they're actualizing enough. But genuine growth happens when you forget yourself in dedication to something worthy, when you're stretched and challenged by demands that come from beyond your own ego. The person who becomes most fully themselves is usually the person who is least focused on becoming themselves and most focused on serving something they considered important. This explains why lives organized around comfort and pleasure often feel empty, while lives organized around meaningful challenge feel fulfilling even when they're difficult. The single mother working 2 jobs to support her children, exhausted and stressed, might have a stronger sense that her life matters than the affluent person whose primary concern is which restaurant to try or which vacation destination to visit. The material circumstances of the second person are objectively better, but the first person has something more valuable, a clear sense of purpose, a reason to get up each morning that transcends her own satisfaction. She's needed. What she does matters. Her struggle has meaning. This doesn't romanticize poverty or suggest that difficult circumstances are somehow good. Given the choice, the single mother would certainly prefer to have more resources and less stress. But it does reveal something important about what humans need to thrive psychologically. We need to be needed. We need to matter for reasons beyond our own pleasure. We need challenges worthy of our effort. We need purposes that call forth our capacities and justify our existence. Without these, even the most favorable material circumstances feel hollow. The question then becomes how to identify or create meaningful purpose in your life, especially if you're in circumstances that don't automatically provide it. In our final chapter, we'll explore practical approaches to discovering your meaning and structuring your life around purpose rather than pleasure, transforming the pursuit of happiness into something more profound, the creation of a life worth living. If these ideas are reshaping how you think about your life and what you're pursuing, subscribe to the channel. We're exploring the most fundamental questions of human existence, and this conversation is just beginning. The shift from pursuing happiness to pursuing meaning sounds appealing in theory, but how do you actually live it? How do you structure your daily existence around purpose rather than pleasure when everything in modern culture pushes you in the opposite direction? When algorithms are designed to maximize your engagement through dopamine hits, when advertising constantly promises that happiness is just one purchase away, when social media rewards the appearance of a perfect, pleasant life, how do you orient yourself toward meaning instead? This is where Frankl's insights move from philosophy into practice, from understanding into application. The first step is the hardest because it requires letting go of something you've probably believed your entire life. That you deserve to be happy, that life owes you pleasant experiences, that if you're not enjoying yourself, something has gone wrong. This belief is so deeply embedded in contemporary consciousness that questioning it feels almost heretical. But Frankl would say this belief is precisely what's making you miserable. The moment you release the expectation that life should make you happy, the moment you stop measuring every experience against whether it's pleasant enough, you become free to engage with life as it actually is rather than constantly disappointed that it's not what you think it should be. This doesn't mean becoming pessimistic or resigned. It means accepting that life is difficult, that struggle is inherent in existence, and that this is okay. More than okay, it's the very condition that makes meaning possible. Once you release the happiness imperative, you can start asking better questions. Instead of, what will make me happy? Ask, what is worth doing regardless of whether it makes me happy? What would I be willing to struggle for? What cause, what person, what work could I dedicate myself to such that the inevitable difficulties of life would feel worthwhile? These questions don't have easy answers, and the answers will be different for each person because meaning is personal. What gives your life significance might be completely different from what gives mine significance, and that's not only acceptable but necessary. Frankl emphasized that there's no universal meaning of life, no one purpose that applies to everyone. There's only the specific meaning of your specific life in your specific circumstances, and discovering that requires honest self-examination. One practical approach Frankl suggested is to imagine yourself at the end of your life looking back. From that vantage point, what would you want to have done with the time you had? What would you regret not doing? Who would you want to have been? What would you want to be remembered for? These questions cut through the noise of daily concerns and momentary desires to reveal what actually matters to you at the deepest level. Most people, when they seriously engage with these questions, don't wish they'd spent more time pursuing pleasure or avoiding discomfort. They wish they'd been braver, more loving, more committed to something meaningful. They wish they'd taken a harder path that mattered rather than the easier path that led nowhere important. Another approach is to pay attention to what makes you forget yourself. Frankl emphasized that meaning is found in self-transcendence, in those moments when you're so absorbed in something beyond yourself that you lose track of time, forget to monitor your emotional state, become fully present to what you're doing rather than constantly evaluating whether you're enjoying it. What activities or experiences create this state for you? It might be creative work where hours pass without notice. It might be deep conversation where you're completely focused on understanding another person. It might be physical challenge where you're absorbed in the effort. It might be service where you're meeting another's need. These moments of self-transcendence are clues to your meaning, indicators of what genuinely engages you at a level deeper than pleasure. The third critical element is embracing necessary struggle. This is perhaps the most countercultural aspect of Frankl's approach. We're taught to avoid difficulty, to make life easier, to eliminate obstacles. But Frankl observed that humans need challenges to thrive, that we're actually at our best when we're striving toward something difficult but worthwhile. The absence of struggle doesn't create fulfillment. It creates the kind of comfortable misery that characterizes so many modern lives. People need something to overcome, some resistance against which to exert themselves. This is why people voluntarily do difficult things like run marathons, climb mountains, or take on ambitious projects even when they don't have to. We need challenge. The question is whether your challenges are meaningful, whether they're connected to purposes you genuinely value, or whether they're arbitrary difficulties that serve no larger purpose. Frankl also emphasized responsibility as central to meaningful existence. When you organize your life around happiness, you become a consumer of experiences, passively seeking circumstances that will make you feel good. When you organize your life around meaning, you become a creator and contributor, actively responding to what life asks of you. This shift from passive consumption to active contribution fundamentally changes your relationship with existence. You're no longer constantly asking, what can I get from life? But rather, what is life asking for me? What needs doing that I'm positioned to do? What gift can I offer? What service can I provide? What responsibility can I take up? These questions give you agency and purpose even in difficult circumstances, because there's always something you can do, some way you can respond, some meaning you can create through your actions and attitude. This brings us to perhaps the most profound aspect of living for something greater than happiness. It makes you resilient in a way that happiness seeking never can. When your well-being depends on feeling good, you're fragile. Any difficulty, any discomfort threatens your well-being. You spend enormous energy trying to arrange circumstances to be pleasant and avoid anything that might disrupt your positive state. But when your well-being comes from living meaningfully, from being engaged with purposes that matter to you, you become remarkably resilient. Difficulty doesn't threaten you because difficulty is expected, even welcomed as part of pursuing something worthwhile. Your satisfaction doesn't depend on circumstances being easy. It depends on you being engaged in something significant, and you can be engaged in something significant under almost any circumstances. This is what Frankl demonstrated in the concentration camps, and what he helped countless patients discover in his practice. The people who survive and even grow through terrible circumstances aren't those trying to maintain happiness. They're those who find or create meaning in their situation, who dedicate themselves to something beyond their own survival or comfort. And the people who collapse, even in favorable circumstances, are often those who have nothing larger than their own pleasure to live for. When comfort is your goal and comfort is readily available, you'd expect satisfaction. Instead, you often get emptiness, restlessness, a gnawing sense that something essential is missing. What's missing is purpose. What's missing is struggle in service of something meaningful. What's missing is the deep satisfaction that comes not from feeling good, but from knowing your existence matters, that you're contributing something, that you're meeting life's demands with courage and commitment. You don't need happiness. That's a byproduct that arrives unbidden when you're absorbed in what matters. You need meaning. You need purpose. You need something worth struggling for. And when you have that, When you've organized your life around what truly matters rather than what momentarily pleases, you discover something far more valuable than happiness. You discover a life worth living.